Hi everyone and welcome back. So in the last video, you might have understood the basic setup for AWS CDK, and we were able to deploy the basic hello world example using CDK. We deployed a Lambda function, and we also generated a SQS queue. Now in this video, we are going to deploy the Lambda function. Okay, in the last video, it was just all about understanding the stack, what are the different CDK commands, CDK init, CDK deploy, CDK send, CDK destroy. Now, in this video, we are going to create a Lambda function through CDK. The overall objective of our whole this exercise is we have this Node.js service. Okay, and what we are going to do is this Node.js service with the AWS CDK code, we should be able to deploy that as a Lambda and API gateway. This is actually the outcome we want to get. So to get there, we need to understand how we can deploy a simple hello world Lambda function, right? Then we will replace hello world with this Node.js microservice and CDK code, and we should be able to generate a Lambda API gateway. Lambda, we should be able to deploy our microservice as a Lambda. API gateway can expose HTTP interface, which can trigger a Lambda, and DynamoDB for persistence, all these things. So that's our objective. So what we will do is we will just go and take a look onto the simple AWS CDK example, which is deploying a Lambda function.
Everyone, and welcome
So here
back.
is our
Welcome to
simple
our
Lambda
training
function.
sessions. And in here we are covering AWS.
So here is our simple Lambda function, and you can see it's just another demo example. Here I'm just creating this folder as a Lambda CDK, right? And these are Lambda CDK stack, which is generated using CDK init command. And you can see this CDK stack contains, you can just change the name of the stack, API Lambda stack. And these are the environment variables which you will be passing. And there are some other variables also you can pass, because this is nothing but we are calling this demo stack class and just creating the object of it. So you can pass any custom arguments which you have. Here I'm passing the stage. Stage can be nothing but the environment variable, like okay, I'm deploying this Lambda to dev, production, and all different environment. Here we are going to create other constructs inside this stack class. So the Lambda stack is extending the cdk.props, and this Lambda props, let's say if you are passing some custom arguments, then those can be here. Stage is a string. Stage can be, and this is extending the Lambda props, and here Lambda stack we are getting from Lambda app, and this stage is actually a string. We are making sure that it will be passed. Okay, this is optional argument. So first we will get the stage, and then inside this class Lambda stack, you can actually add a constructs. Those constructs can be Lambda function, API gateway, DynamoDB, or any. These are like AWS resources. Here first we are trying to create a Lambda function. So there are many ways to create a Lambda function. There is a Node.js function class also there that helps you to create a Lambda function. What the Lambda function needs is the code, the function code, right? Because this construct is going to create a Lambda function, but here we also need to know what is the Lambda function code, right? Like which function or which particular TypeScript file you are going to deploy as a Lambda function. So inside this Lambda function, you can pass some arguments that will define the arguments, like okay, memory size for the Lambda function, what is the timeout, what is the runtime is a Lambda, because runtime can be a Python, Node.js, Java, and all. What is the Lambda timeout? Runtime is Node.js 16. This is specifying handler. Now handler is the function which it is talking. So what we are saying is the main function is a handler, and the entry point, what we are considering as the file which you are passing as a Lambda function. So we just need to pass the file name. If from the current directory name, you need to go back, and then there is a source folder. Inside source, there is a index.ts. This is the file. So it's just nothing but a Node.js file path from current directory where you need to go. So this is index.ts you wanted to deploy as a Lambda function. So pass the other argument like timeout, memory size, runtime, and this Lambda function. Now inside this, we already have these commands: cdk deploy, cdk send, cdk destroy, and all. And this cdk.json already has You also need to update the CDK JSON. In CDK JSON, you need to specify your root file, which is nothing but bin lambda app.ts, because that contains the stack name, not your index.ts. So inside a bin, make sure that it is reflecting the correct file name, lambda app.ts, and then you can start running the basic CDK commands. So npm run CDK deploy, because that is CDK deploy will use this npx command, and you can see it will be deploying this API lambda stack. Make sure you already have a AWS credentials configured, and you can see it is creating this lambda. It is just giving you, okay, what all new resources we are creating, and this is the lambda function. You can see async function main, and it is just returning a simple message, successful lambda invocation. And when you do CDK deploy, it will tell you what all it is going to create. So it is just creating IAM role and the lambda function for us. CDK deploy is nothing but CDK deploy command. You can also trigger the same command using npx CDK deploy, right? Or you can just use the locally installed CDK to deploy things. And you can see this API lambda function is getting created. This is the stack. This is the AR and the resource name for your resource which you have created. It can be lambda function, API gateway, Dynamo, and anything. When you do CDK destroy, what it will do is it is going to destroy the resources which you have created. So it's just like a simple exercise, how the resources are created, how the resources are destroyed. In the resource, it has just created a lambda function. So we can also go to we can also go to AWS and check this lambda function has been created or not. We are also passing the stage as a name, so it can have a lambda function can be deployed to different environment, and that will have the name as a suffix. And here I just triggered a destroy command, so it is deleting the resource which has been created, which is nothing but a simple lambda function. CDK out is actually a reference like what all resources we are creating while deploying this, and it generates a CloudFormation template which then pushed to AWS. In CloudFormation template, it already know what all resources are there, what is the new resource. It based on that it creates and delete things. So this is happening through new Node.js function, right? Then there are other ways also in which you can actually create a new lambda function. New lambda, and I think inside a constructor, inside this dot function, you can pass all the argument. Inside this is an object. Okay, what is the lambda function name? API lambda 2. And then inside an object, you can specify the runtime, memory size, all these arguments. So there are two mechanisms or two different ways to create a lambda function using Node.js. You can use a Node.js function class or simple lambda dot function. I always go with this second approach. Here you can specify the path of the code and all. So now we have two different ways, API lambda 2 and API lambda. These are two different constructs inside a same stack. So when you are deploying, it will be creating both the functions. We already have destroyed the existing stack. So now we can just do npm run CDK deploy. That will deploy these resources, and we can check where these lambda functions has been created. Here the stage was not being passed, you can see. So we need to pass the stage in the environment variable. So we can just say export stage equal to development or production, and then npm run deploy. So stage is passed, and then you can say export stage equal to development, and then npm run CDK deploy. So stage will be passed to the construct, and two lambda functions will be suffixed with the development as will be created. Okay, it's a CDK deploy command. It will create the resources, and then we can validate the resources which has been created. So these are the two different ways we have already seen that these are the ways in which you can create a lambda function. You can see API lambda 2, the handler function. Handler is index.handler. Inside index.ts, we need to have a handler function name. Okay, so these are the two different lambda mechanisms, and inside these lambdas, they are doing nothing but saying hello world. So here also we are doing the same thing, lambda dot function, lambda function 2, and when you deploy it, you will know what you are creating. Okay, this is the final output you will get. Okay, I can just reload this. This is the lambda node, and lambda node, there is a handler index dot handler. So once the lambda is deployed to AWS, you can go and check the Node.js function, which is API lambda 2. Okay, and it's also passed same argument, like what is your main handler, memory size, runtime, timeouts, and all. Npm run deploy. I mean, there is a issue with the name because this that name I have already used. So I need to create a lambda with a new name. So it is just deploying and creating these two lambda functions for me. If this CDK deploy command successful, that means resource has been created. In some cases, there is a no change in the resource, and when we do CDK deploy, it does nothing. So here, either we can keep the stack name same or we can change it. These are the resources. It is using API Lambda to development. Okay, so we can just deploy one Lambda. I mean, that is just for demo how we are writing this. Environment variables you can pass because Lambda is in Node.js. Even the Node.js microservice has environment variables like, okay, process, port, node environment, database URL, file system path URL, or many other environment variables. How do we pass them? If you see the Lambda on the AWS console, you will understand this general configuration which contains the timeout and memory. Then there is a permissions. What IAM permissions this Lambda has to read and write, function URL, and then environment variables that we are going to add here. These environment variables will be populated back on your on the Lambda environment variables when we deploy it. So here it is a permissions. It has a permissions to write to the CloudWatch because we need to create a log group, create a log stream and all. That's default permissions which we have added. Lambda 2 dot grant permissions or add permissions. There should be something. Add permissions, and there are other ways like in which you can add the permissions to the Lambda if the Lambda needs to write to SNS, SQS, or needs to do some external different things. Add event source. This event source is when this Lambda act as a listener to a particular SNS topic. Or add event source, it can be SQS. Let's say somebody posted a message on SNS or SQS and Lambda needs to be triggered, then Lambda can be active and it will just read the message from there. So this is all about how we can deploy the Lambda function to the AWS. Now this is like a step by step. Once we understand a simple Lambda function, then we should be able to do a simple microservice, Express app, TypeScript app, and then Nest.js app also you should be able to deploy on AWS Lambda, a single Lambda. Uh, with the proxying, I mean, we should be able to proxy all the requests to that Lambda function. Lambda function at runtime can decide which particular routes to hit. That's how we can manage the API services as a Lambda.